So, welcome back to Tampa Touring. Hey, today we're going to do a little bar maintenance. I got a little bit of an issue with when we'll get into what went on in another video, but when I took this thing to get it dyno tuned, which we'll talk about later, I have a wheel chuck, you know, the ones that you, like the cheap Harbor Freight one, right? It's mounted in my trailer. Then it's a clamshell design, right? So when you ride up into it, it hugs the back wheel, holds it nice and tight in there. Much better than the loopy ones that dirt bikers use and stuff. One of the problems I had when I pulled it out of the chock, the handlebars slipped back. And I know they're tight. They're at spec 35 foot-pounds. But what I'm going to do today is we're going to take the bars, not out, but we're going to take the top clamp off, and I'm going to put a set of 1/4-20 set screws into it to clamp down and hold the bar. My 2007 Street Glide had the same problem. Bars were moving too much, right? They want to move, they weren't knurled well enough or something. Or, you know, the clamps are, you're talking about steel bars with knurls in aluminum. Aluminum is a lot softer. That steel is just going to, you know, dig through that aluminum. So we're going to take it apart. We'll tap it. We'll drill it out. I'll put it on the mini mill and drill it out. We'll tap them. We'll put the bars back to where I want them, and then tighten those set screws down. So give me a second. I'm going to reposition the camera. We'll take this apart. I've already taken the screws out of the sides of the gauge pod. But one thing to be very careful with is getting the horseshoe out from around ignition. Hang on, let me reposition a little bit, and we'll be right back. Alright, so I'll apologize a little bit ahead of time. I'm going to have my hands in the way of things here. The batwing fairings are a little bit easier to work with, but harder to work with, because you actually, to get to the top clamps, you've got to move the whole front fairing. So this setup is a little bit easier to get to. Like I said, I took the 2 screws out already. T25s just come out. Gauge pod loosens up. The problem child here is the horseshoe clamp. These things are made of unobtainium. If you break it, you're going to have a very bad day. So you got to kind of pull up on the back side. That will loosen it from the lower portion of the gauge pod, which is always a bit of a problem. And then the front will come out, and you can pull your horseshoe out. You don't want to break these 2 clips. You don't want to break that piece right there, because that's what clamps it in the back part. Now that we got that out, the whole gauge pod will just come forward. You've got 2 connectors, one on each side for the switches that need to be popped out. One sits on one side and one sits on the other side, so they're not. You get the release clamp there, and the release clamp, and this one is in the front. And then you've got one connector on the inside that actually is where the gauge is. That one's a little bit more difficult to do because it's a clamp on both sides. Try and get your fingernails in there to do it. You can use a small screwdriver. I just prefer to try and do it with my fingernails just to keep from breaking it off, putting too much pressure on it, which is having a little bit of a problem. Getting this other side. There we go. There we go. And the whole pod set lifts right out. So now, besides the disaster of wiring, now when I put these bars on, these are KST Pathfinder bars. Great bars. They're big. They're beefy. Internally wired. The wires actually come out the bottom on both sides and come back and over. You don't actually, these are 12-inch bars. Did not have to replace cables on either end. None of that. So it was very simple, very straightforward to put in. Pulling the wiring through it's got heated grips, and for switch controls was a joy. I can't say anything bad about these bars. I love these bars. Because they're a clamshell at the ends, this part is separate from the crossbar. You can move them however you want. If you want more pullback, you want less pullback. I don't like pullback. I like a more neutral position, so these are probably maybe 5 or 6 degrees of pullback on them, which is not a lot, which is what I really like. So what we've got to do next, and I won't bore you with watching me take bolts out, but these 4 bolts have to come out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to mark a line across both sides so I can get the bars back to where I really want them. So this way I don't have to play with a whole lot of monkeying around with readjustment. Because all I'm going to do is take this top clamp off. I'm going to lay the bars. I'm going to put a moving blanket down, pull these bars down onto the tank, let them rest, take this top clamp off, and then what I'm going to do is right in here, because this bar comes right through this middle here, so right in here on each side I'm going to drill a hole. I'm going to put a 1/4 20 set screw in to put more clamp force and keep that down on there. Right? So we'll be back in a minute after I get this set up, get these marked, and get this top clamp off. Be back. Alright, I got my moving blanket on here. I'm going to try and be as gentle about this as I can and just break these free first. Now these are, I believe the torque spec for this is 36 foot-pounds, so it's not a lot, but it is a good force. And you've got steel bolts going into aluminum, so you know whenever you've got that, you don't crank the hell out of them because you will slip them. So there we go. Bars are now loose enough to roll down. Just pull these up a little bit. Alright, now I'm just going to roll the bars down gently onto the tank. Now they should stay there, shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to now take these bolts out altogether. So off camera I did mark both the bar and the top clamp. And I do suggest, this is just me, you can tell me I'm crazy to do that, and I'm not going to get good torque specs out of it or whatever, but I always put a little bit of anti-seize when you're putting steel bolts into aluminum, anything like that, where you got dissimilar metals. One, it keeps the steel from galling the threads on the aluminum of the bottom clamp of the triple tree. And 2, it helps prevent the corrosion of the dissimilar metals being together. So now this clamp should just come straight up. So you can see, if we look inside, I don't know if I can get it on camera now, but basically what's happened is you can see this polish spot here where the knurls were dug in a little bit, but then they slipped right in there on both sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right basically above those knurl spots, and I'm going to drill the hole and then tap it and put the set screws in. So when we go in, we'll be able to tighten. Once we get these tightened up where we want them, the last thing we'll do is we'll put the set screws in. So I'm going to go over to the mini mill, which is over there someplace, and we'll get to drilling the holes. I'm just going to initially mark basically where I want them on each side here. I'll do some measurements, make sure they're basically even, and then we'll go over to the mill. So I'll be back in a minute. Now, this is going to get loud, so I'll probably have to overdub or cut the audio. The only reason I'm using the mill as opposed to just using a drill is just so I can get it straighter. You can do this with a drill. There's no reason you couldn't. I just want to make sure that I kind of have it as straight as possible. I have the clamp down, I have it clamped in tight into my slide vise. Basically got it lined up to where I want it. So I'll drill one, move it over, drill the other. So let's get that going. we go with the first hole. I'll just move the vise down. Lock it. Yeah, I know. Needs to be oiled. It needs to be cleaned. I've been taking a long time, and I've done quite a bit with it between milling, you know, AR-15 lowers and other stuff. Like I built the zombie bike bag brackets. I welded pieces on and then took the mill and cut the slot for the bolts. Stuff like that. So it needs to be. Yeah, it needs to be lubed. Need some maintenance done on it. Alright, now next hole. Done. Now we gotta do is tap it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap it. Basically, what I'd like to do is tap it while it's sitting in the vise, just to make it easier. Now you could put the tap in, run it at a low speed and appropriate pressure off the mill. I don't necessarily like to do that, only because I'm always afraid I'm going to put too much pressure, I'm going to strip the holes, and then I'm going to have a problem. So when you do a 1/4-20, you need to have a number 3 drill bit. I don't have numbered drill bits, so this is a 13/64, which is just a little bit smaller. This is like 0.208. A number 3 drill bit is 0.213. So it's a little bit smaller, but it should work. Let me go grab my tap, be right back. Alright, so let's see if we can get this tap started straight. Now, one of the things when you're tapping, now this is aluminum, so it's fairly soft, but once you get into it, you get it going, and I just broke tension on that. Alright, let's get that reset. Is to go kind of do a back and forth. So you get it started, bring it back. That kind of helps clear your chips out, and this is just not tightening up enough. Probably getting kind of beat and worn. And as I was saying, oh, that's probably why I probably have it down over the shank a little bit too much and it's not grabbing. That's why. The reason you go back and forth is to kind of clear chips out of there so you don't get it bound up. Right? In, back, in, back. It also helps clean out your thread points. Get your chips out of your way. I always find it better to go back and forth than to try and manhandle it in all at one time. You get one shot at cutting your threads, and you don't cut them right, and you got a problem. Right? Then your set screw's not going to get in there right, it's not going to grab right. And now we're into the threads and we're clean. All the way through. Yep, all the way through. There we go. There's the first one. Okay, we'll give it a quick run through again, make sure everything's good and cleaned. Perfect. Just what the doctor ordered. Now I'm going to get my drill bit out of my way so I don't have to unclamp and reclamp. And because these holes are slightly smaller than what would normally want to use with a 1/4 20 tap, it's a little bit tougher to get them started, right? Because when you're using a standard tap, your start point is, threads aren't. It's narrower than the normal threads are to go in, so that you can get it started in. And if you're using the right size drill bit, that fits in there perfectly. I, however, like I said, do not have the right size drill bit, so we'll make do with what we've got. And when I put these set screws in, I am actually going to put a little bit of anti-seize on them as well to not gall the threads on the steel to the aluminum. I spent all this time trying to tap them. Ideally, I'd like to have a third one right here in the middle would be even better, just for total stability reasons, But I think the two should work. Besides, Lowe's, for whatever reason, sells them in 2-packs. So instead of buying 4 of them when I wanted 3, I guess I could have done 4. It would have been probably way overkill. Alright, there we go. Alright. Clamp out. There we go. What I am going to do, I am going to take, there's a little bit of burring on here, so I'm going to take a round file and just deburr that slightly. Or in this case, I'm actually going to take a half round file and just take that, and I'll just take that burr right out of there. There you go. And like I said, it's wanted them kind of where the knurl points were, so it kind of grabs into those knurls as well. So that's basically what we got, is where the knurls are sitting. And that should give us the clamping force that I'm looking for. Do I need to take these burrs off? No, they probably actually help bite in a little bit, but I also don't want the burrs to interfere with the set screws. So I'm going to run the set screws in as a test. I'm going to take them out because, like I said, I want to have anti-seize on those. Yeah, and that is actually fitting like a glove. They're sliding right in. The set screws will slide right into those holes. And no problem whatsoever. And yes, they're going to stick up. They're a little bit taller than what I want. They're 1/2 inch long, but it was what was available at the time. And those won't interfere with anything on the inside. So it'll give us plenty of bite points to it. Alright, let's go get positioned back up, and we'll be back. Okay, so I've got a little bit of anti-seize on my set screws. Since I've already put anti-seize on these previously, I'm not going to reload them up with more anti-seize. They should be fine. I'm just just got to get these 4 started. Run them in with my Allen, just so that they're snug, just kind of hand tight. Not going to torque them down at this point. I'm going to get my torque wrench out so I can actually set them correctly. Alright, now comes the fun part. Getting the bars up and lined back up to where we want them, and that they're even on each side. Because the last thing you want is uneven bars. Right? Which I can already tell needs to go this way a little bit more. There we go, that should be fairly close to where it was. We'll check, make sure we're not hitting the windshield when we're done before we set the set screws in. This should be, I should be able to get it hand tight enough to be able to release the bars, but what I'm going to do anyways, let's just give it a quick, just a snug down so they don't move. The last thing I want is them to go whack in my tank or something. Should probably be a bad thing. And let's double check. Our alignment is fairly good on each side. And this cable is again out of the way. It always does that. There we go. Back to the inside where it wants to go. Alright, I'll give it a quick bar change turn here. Make sure we're still not hitting. We're not hitting. Yep, we're about where we were before, so we're good. Alright, here we go, my torque wrench. Alright. Now, because there's no real torque specifications for these, I'm going to actually just go with the exact same torque levels. Hopefully not strip them out because there's not a lot of aluminum there. So I don't want to go too much. And because there's no torque spec for what I'm trying to do, I'm going to take these down to about 10 foot-pounds. That's probably too much. I should probably go maybe about 30 inch-pounds or so, but those are pretty decent now. Basically want them snug. I don't want them stripping out of the aluminum or anything, so I just want them snug. So they're biting into the steel, and they are snug. Alright, now we should have, there's no, all you're getting is the flex of the, you're getting the flex of the bushings. I'd like to someday, if I end up doing this and doing the front shocks or front forks, then I would pull urethane bushings as opposed to just your standard plastic bushings. So, alright, I think we're done. Now it's just a matter of reversing the process and putting it back away. We'll be back. Okay, and there we go. Bars are where they pretty much were. You can see they're even on both sides. Horseshoes back in, gauge pods back on. Just a matter of kind of reversing what you did before, right? There's not that much, so there's not that much to it to do the set screws. And now we're not going to pull back and move out of position again, which was kind of scary when you're trying to pull it back up out of that chock and having to pull that freaking 1,000 pounds worth of bike back, and having those bars move is a little disconcerting, right? So, I guess you could also dimple the bar to where the set screws are going, or to kind of drill into it. You could actually, if you wanted to, drill through, tap the whole, do it all on the bike. In this case, you don't have to worry about it because there's no wires going through that center bar. That's the beauty of these bars. These bars are open underneath these side clamps. The wires come down and in and then in, and there's nothing running through that center point. If you've ever taken apart Road Glide bars, stock bars, there's a pin in there. You got to drive the pin out in order to put different aftermarket bars on, because that pin is there for adjustments for the factory, right? They set it in and it stays in place in the right position because there's a slot in the bottom of the bars, and that pin aligns it for the factory. That's all it's there for. Don't need it, right? You can just drive it right out. It's just, like I said, it's just knurled through the aluminum, and it's not even knurled, it's just pressed on. It's easy to tap out. It's not into very tight. So there we go. Simple little upgrade. So next what we'll do is we're going to talk about what's all been done to this CVO. I know people buy a CVO and go, hey, what's there to do to it? Everything's on it. We're going to talk about the things I've done to it to make it more enjoyable for me. This bike's name is Evil, and there's a reason for it. It is evil. It has hated me. It has fought me all the way. But we'll talk about that in the next video. Until then, remember, ride fast, take chances. See ya!